Welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue working on our 1993 Mustang GT convertible. We got to straighten out our floor a little bit, and then we can get our quarter and our rear body panel up here, see how they fit, maybe even get them welded up. So let's get started. We'll start with straightening out the floor. Gives me a chance to lay down on the job. We're going to hammer out what we can of those kinks that were in the floor. About 50% of them came out when we pulled it, but the metal's pretty stretched, so there still is about half of what was in there before. And unfortunately, we can get to some of it, but not all of it, because there's a bracket back there. So we're going to hammer out what we can to get it flat. And then the stuff that's underneath the bracket, we're just going to decide if we should go ahead and fix it with a pin welder, or just paint it up and throw the trunk liner in it when we're all done and cover it up and leave it for the next guy to say, somebody's been here before. We'll worry about that later. It isn't going to affect us now. So we're just getting most of it out of there, just to make sure that nothing moves when we're hammering it out. Now that we have our trunk floor as straight as we can get it from underneath with our hammer and our punch, we're going to go ahead and get our wheelhouse in here. We still have some extra pieces that we just trimmed out of here to get this piece out real quick, so we're going to cut those off of there. There were a few spot welds where that bracket came down on here. We drilled those out with no problem. Unfortunately, Ford decided to put a big long stitch weld across this entire thing to fuse it to the other half of the wheelhouse. So in order to get that apart, we need to kind of grind out basically a big channel. We're going to grind through the outer panel that we're removing, and we're going to not leave any marks in our lower panel that we're saving. And then we'll figure out possibly some other more efficient way to put this back on. I think I got all our welds. Now we're going to find a place to try to start separating this. Where our spot welds were, probably a good place to start. Those came right out. Now we can flip the piece over, we'll scrape out some of that seam sealer in there, and we'll just split it right between the two panels. It's the easiest way to get those apart. Unfortunately, I guess I decided I was doing this off camera, so you're just going to have to believe me. I took it apart. Now we're going to go ahead and trim out our old piece of our wheelhouse, and for that we're going to use our reciprocating butter knife, which is suspiciously sharp. I don't know what's happening to this channel. We got saw blades with teeth, ear protection, eye protection, and we're wearing gloves. Maybe the safety experts have gotten to me. But have no fear. If the day ever comes that I do find a shop, we are going to have a very strict safety last policy. Instead of grinding out that big long seam weld, we're just going to cut this piece off and make it flat. And most likely, I'm just going to weld our other piece right over the top of that after we smooth everything out. Pile. Now we have to address what is probably one of my favorite testaments to quality on this car. And that's, if you don't have room, what do? Well, they have this pinch weld here that was in the way of where the convertible top goes down. So, their solution? Smash it with a hammer. Yes, there's some guy on the assembly line whose job is to just hit it with a big hammer. I can only assume that every one of the employees in the UAW was fighting for this job to smash this part over. So we're going to straighten it out. That way I can use that little eyelet that's in there to line up our other panel, because that's what that eyelet is for. So once we get it straight, we'll be able to set our other panel up there, line up the holes, and we'll know everything is right where it belongs. There's also one in the back, so I cut it long enough that I can use both ends and get this piece exactly where it was from the factory. And have no fear, exactly where it was from the factory had a whole lot of tolerances. That hole is about a ½ inch around, and I've seen them as long as you can get a 1/8 inch drill bit through there, call it lined up. So luckily this one was actually pretty square, so we can square up our other one. We'll slide our piece in there, overlap it. It gets all the way in there. We just need to push it down a little bit. Get some ladies' feet. They're tapered, so just slide it in there and it kind of lines itself up. Another one for the other end. So now our piece is right where it belongs. We'll clamp it up. Take out our alignment pins. And now we're going to go ahead and mark it. We cut that piece a little bit longer than we had to, so we're just going to mark where the other piece ends so we can trim it all off. I don't want to try to weld over those letters, and I definitely don't want to weld underneath that little gutter piece for our convertible top. We pull our clamps off of here and slide it out of here. Now we're going to cut it a little bit longer because we're going to overlap this piece. The height isn't particularly important, so an overlap won't matter, and it's a lot easier than doing a butt weld with a backing. We'll have a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch of overlap, whatever that is. Wow. And we'll slide it back up there one more time. Mark our holes so that we know where to clean up for our welds. And now you see why I didn't want to weld underneath that channel. It'd be a little difficult. Now we're just going to grind off all of our paint and e-coat and primer and whatever is under there so that we can get a nice clean weld. Grind that piece we cut off flat so that we don't have any sharp edges sticking out of there, since we are going to have a little strip in there in between. So we have our wheelhouse all trimmed out. I drilled some spot weld holes in here so I could weld it to this old piece where it overlaps. The inside here, when it's overlapped like this, I'm just going to seam weld this entire seam. That way that no dirt or debris is going to get stuck in that little weld there. On this side, I don't care if it's exposed. I could just seam seal it and nothing should be getting in here. You're not having the tires throw stuff at it. Instead of the long welds that they had in here from the factory, I just drilled some 5/16 or 8mm holes, and that's how I'm going to weld that. I actually just left that other piece on there because to grind all those out is kind of a pain, so there's just going to be that one little strip in there, and I'll just weld to the strip and onto there, and I'll be able to line up my alignment hole here, and everything should fit. Should being the operative word. So let's get some weld through primer on here, get it clamped up, and start welding. We'll put all our weld through primer on our bare metal mating surfaces, basically just the parts that are sandwiched together. We don't want it anywhere else. And we'll hit the other side. And I am going to have to grind the paint off where our line is there. We just haven't figured it out yet, but I'll get it. Everything lined up. I did scribe a line where it goes, just so that I make sure it's nice and straight. And then those two holes that line it up from the factory, we'll make sure that everything's exactly where it belongs. One more bigger clamp. For everybody that says I have way too many vice grips, you can never have too many vice grips. The more you can put on, the less you have to sit and move them. You can just keep welding. So we'll start welding up all of our little spot weld holes. And before all the armchair welders come at me in the comments and tell me that the weld isn't clean because it's spitting, you've never welded through weld through primer before. It takes a second to burn that off of there, and then it quits spitting. We got our wheelhouse all welded up, and I did decide to go ahead and weld the rest of the seam on this side just because getting seam seal in there later is going to be a little more difficult than I had originally thought. So we're just going to grind it all down, we'll prime it all, we'll never see this again, and we don't have to worry about it rusting. Same thing with the inside. And then we can go ahead and fit our quarter up there. So let's get this all ground down and primed and move on. So if you didn't understand what I meant by that, I welded the seam on the inside underneath and on the outside on top. I was originally only going to weld the bottom of it, but because once the quarter panel's on there, getting seam sealer in there would be a little bit difficult. So if it's just welded up, I don't need any seam sealer. It'll be primed and good, and we're ready to go. So now we're just grinding everything flat, make it look pretty. Grinder and paint makes me the welder I ain't. We're going to scuff everything up. We ground everything down and sanded off all the loose stuff. Knock off whatever was left on there. And we'll go ahead and put our etching primer on there. We're going to go a little crazy. We don't care if it runs. We're going to let that run down between the two panels and seal it off so we don't have to worry about rust. And somebody got a little overzealous with the air chisel, so we're going to go ahead and cover that up. And we're going to go ahead and start cleaning up all of our spot welds on our rear body panel and our rails so that we can get our piece ready to go up there. And at this point, I realized just how many spot welds there are on this Mustang. I guess they went for quantity, not quality. Luckily, all these spot welds, this is just regular old low strength steel instead of high strength steel, so they drill out pretty easy. If this was high strength steel, would have gone through quite a few drill bits. I guess there is a benefit to working on the old cars. Make sure we got them all. And we did grind off our factory installed rust. So we taped off where we're going to put a weld through primer on there. We're going to sand everything down, and then we're going to go ahead and prime this so that hopefully we don't have any aftermarket rust. Peel our tape off of there. Now we can go ahead and throw our weld through primer on, and if we get weld through primer over our etching primer, it won't matter. It's not going to hurt anything. That's why we do one before the other. We're getting towards the end of our weld through primer can, but I'm cheap, so I'm going to get every gram out of this thing. We're only putting it where our welds are going to go. Unlike our etching primer, it doesn't actually protect the metal, well, at least not until you weld through it. Once you weld through it, it seals up the weld. If you just apply it over bare metal and don't weld it, it'll still rust through it. Probably not as bad as bare metal, but not as good as etching primer. Work our way over our wheel arch. Put a little bracket over here. Make sure you get underneath. And there's some spot on our rails. And of course, across where our rear body panel goes. Make sure we get underneath where our brackets for our fuel tank straps are going to go. We did leave those all attached to our other big piece. And even if I don't put it in the video, I do go over this a couple times because there's a lot of different angles, pieces that are inside other pieces and around other pieces. So occasionally you miss spots, and you want to make sure you got weld through primer in all of them because it's too late once that piece is up there to get it in there. So we have to go back over it sometimes. We get our piece on the floor here where our other piece overlaps. And now we can start prepping our big puzzle piece, getting ready to go up on our car. Our car's prepped and ready to go, so once this piece is ready to go, we should be able to put it together. But we have just as many spot welds on this piece as we had on the other piece. And on this piece we have to clean up both sides. So it's actually twice the work. And right about now, I'm really missing my weld prepping gnome. Gotta get one of those. Wonder if they have them on Amazon. And I'm hoping that everything fits so we only have to put this piece up one time. If it's a smaller piece like our quarter on the other side, if I got to put it up and take it off 10 times, it doesn't matter, it slips right in. This one's going to be quite the struggle to get it in there because there's so many overlapping panels and things that go around other things. It's going to take a little effort. So hopefully one shot and we're done, but we'll find out. Which is the reason that I'm prepping this ahead of time. Normally I would try a dry fit without any weld through primer on there, but on the off chance that it does fit, if it is all prepped and ready to go, I don't have to take it back out again. So that's why we're doing it all now. Not to mention, I'm getting it out of the way because it's tedious and I really don't like this. Very unskilled labor. Pretty much anybody can do it. That's where I started learning. Grind off all of our factory rust here. Leave it bare metal so you can start some fresh rust. And we'll go ahead and put our weld-through primer on. Okay, I guess we used all that can. We had to resort to a new one. I think we got it all. And now the struggle begins. But it's also the most rewarding part, because if we get this piece in here, it looks like we got something accomplished. Whether we did or not, well, that remains to be seen. But it'll take me a little while to figure out how it came out of there. I think I need to get that panel over our trunk floor. It's be a lot easier with more than one person, but as we all know, I have no friends, so we're gonna struggle by ourselves. There are some braces that attach to the side of the frame rail on each side, so we do have to make sure that we're getting it around the frame rail. And we also have to slide this top piece underneath our center piece. And yes, I know it's a little low on the other side, but I'm going to work on one problem at a time. I think we got it up there. We're going to get our helping hand in here. It should hold it in place so we can work on the other side. Tap everything in there. And go ahead and put a clamp on this side. I don't think we'll be taking it out for a little while. Get our piece to slide all the way under. And we can put our self-tapping screws up in the front. Put the front of our quarter in. And we need to push the bottom in. We need 3 hands, so we'll use our knee to hold it in. We'll go ahead and put a clamp on that pinch weld. We'll clamp up here on top. Close the door and see how bad our day is going to be. Well, it's looking like our day isn't going to be as bad as I anticipated. Gap is nice and even all the way up and down. Might as well go ahead and throw our reinforcement in here. I did clean all the rust off of the bumper shock, so it should slide right in there once we get it past the odd-shaped end. We're going to need our little persuader to tap it the rest of the way in there. And we'll go ahead and throw our bolts in there just to make sure everything lines up. A lot easier to do it now than after it's all painted. Once we get those bumper shocks lined up with the holes on either side of the frame rail, the bolt slips right through and we can screw it into the J-nut. And then we'll snug it up just to keep it in place. We are going to take it out again, but I want to make sure everything fits and everything's tightened up. Head over to the other side. We just snug that up so we still have some movement, because this side is going to be just as much of a struggle. It's going to need a little tap, tap, taparoo. And I guess this side was not quite the struggle I thought it was going to be. It was actually easier than the other side. After we got our big puzzle piece in here, I did take it down off the jack stands and set it on all fours. And the reason I left it up on the jack stands was I wanted to have room to get that piece in there because I wasn't sure how difficult it was going to be. Turns out it was pretty easy. Probably could have set it on all fours before I did that. But I wanted to get everything lined up when it was sitting on all fours, even though the jack stands were underneath the rear end and the stress should technically be the same as if it was sitting on all four tires, it was on an angle. And since Fox bodies have the structural integrity of a wet noodle, I wanted to make sure that it was sitting in its natural state before the car show, not the natural state after where it's upside down after taking out a crowd. But pre-car show, it'd be sitting on all fours. I want to make sure that I lined up my gaps when it was like that. So our door gap is fine, our quarter gap is fine. Our bumper reinforcement actually slid right in. I didn't even have to loosen up the bumper shocks or anything. That's exactly where it came off the old car, slid right into this one. Tells me that my alignment rack actually got it in the right spot, and so did I. So now we're gonna keep pressing our luck and see if we can get our deck lid to fit, and then go from there. We're gonna set our deck lid up here. We're not gonna put our shocks on or our springs. We don't need them, we're gonna be taking it back off. We did leave our hinges on here, so now we're just gonna line them all up. The hole that has the nut and the bolt is pretty big. There's a lot of movement, but our self-tapping hole pretty much has to go right back where it was unless we're going to weld it up and drill a new one. Instead of putting the bolts in there, I'm just going to put some clamps on it. It's going to hold it in place and tell us if we got it where we want it. It accomplishes the same thing as putting our nut and bolt in there, and it's a lot easier to take on and off, and since we're going to be doing that a lot, it makes sense. We're just going to go for dead center in the middle of the bigger hole. And clamp it up as soon as we adjust our clamp. Whether or not our self-tapper is aligned, I'll find out when I put that quarter on. Now we need to clamp that body panel up. Clamp that fits in there, and then one that fits in there and still allows the trunk to close. Pull our makeshift prop rod out of there and close our trunk and see how our gaps look. So our self-tapping hole is dead center. We can run that back in there. Our gap looks pretty good on the front and all the way down the side. It's not ideal at the bottom and the back, but that's how it was from the factory. Welcome to the Fox body. So far so good. Our door to our quarter gap is good. Our quarter to our trunk lid is good. Now we got to keep continuing on around the corner. And that's where things might go bad. We need to take the rest of our quarter off at the bottom over there. I am going to put the entire quarter in, mainly because the seam sealer was broken out of the bottom and I had to replace it anyway. And our quarter wasn't rotted out, so why put a seam in there when we don't have to? We'll just put the whole thing in. Saves on body work. So we're going to do all that next time. We're going to end on a high note with everything fitting, because if I put that quarter in and it doesn't fit, well, there's going to be a little bit of work to get everything lined up. So I will see you guys next time, and we're going to find out if this thing fits together and I pulled it right, or if I have some work to do. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.